Welcome to part 2 of Talking Walking Comics, issues 5 through 10, continuation from last week's episode. So then they bury Amy because she's dead, and we don't go through that whole process that we went through in the show where Andrea sat with Amy and was rocking her dead body waiting for her to come back so she could stab her in the head. We never get to that part. They just go ahead and bury her because I think in the comic they haven't gotten to the whole you need a headshot to kill necessarily.
Because I thought Andrea, because I thought, it was like, you're right, first of all, it was not this protracted thing that it was on television. But I thought it was pretty much, Amy's not doing well, Amy's dead, and then there was like a panel and a bang. And I thought, I'll have to go back and look. I think Andrea may have actually shot her in the head.
Okay.
I'm not certain, but they did bury her after that. But they don't know, right? They don't know a couple things right now.
Right.
She was bit. I think they did know if you're bit, you're going to come back.
Yeah, but she got like a whole, I mean, she was dead. I mean, there was a whole, that thing got a hold of her in the neck and just...
Yeah.
It was gone. Anyway, okay, so...
Jim was over there mining it.
Because I thought they were all just going, because they go through this whole thing where Meat is taking it out of the zombie, and he's like pounding and wailing on him, and then they're like, yeah, okay, you got him. And then we find out he's bit, and he's the one that they were sort of nursing over, but okay. I don't think it really matters one way or another anyway. So, but they don't go through the whole, like, I'm going to stab her in the head. It's sort of, nursing her, waiting for her to turn around, which was sort of what they did in the show, is she waited for her sister to turn before doing that.
Yeah.
Right. So then, okay, so we bury her, and then there's this very sort of distracting thing that happens. It gets cold, and Rick has to wear a shirt on his head, and the tag is right here. So, like, every single frame, he has this tag on his head. I just wanted to cut it off with scissors or a Bowie knife or something. I don't know. Like, he wears this turban of, I don't know if it's a T-shirt. I don't know what it is. He doesn't have a hat.
Carl's got his hat.
So he's got it. Yeah, Carl's got his hat. And so he wears this, like, shirt on his head with this tag right here. And what's really funny is in some of the cover art, there's actually one of Rick with this shirt turban with the tag right here, and then he's got that blanket wrapped around him, and he looks like a little kid playing superhero or playing, zombie apocalypse. He does it. It has this sort of like childlike feel to it. It doesn't, where it's almost not like, he's the adult going through all these horrible things. Because he's got that blanket tied around him, like a cape. It almost feels sort of childlike, but really good art. But yeah, I just thought that was interesting. So Meat continues to be sick, and this is one of the things while they're out hunting where out of absolutely nowhere, Shane just turns around and starts dropping F-bombs about how what happened to Amy and how Meat getting bit was not his fault.
Yep.
Just out of nowhere, this is not my fault. Like,
right, you're turning everybody against me now. I was the leader of the group, and then you showed up with your whole non-craziness, and now I'm getting unseated. I was emperor, and it's not my fault, but everyone's going to blame me now.
Right.
And I kind of want your wife is worked in there, I think.
A little bit. Yeah, we see Dale comforting Andrea with his arm out like this, and Andrea's like over here. He's like, "Is everything okay?" And then we cut back to Jim, who has decided he wants to die in the woods. So they go and drop Meat off, which they do in the show, but that's after they pack up and go. Yep. They take him with and then drop him off on the way. This, they actually take him out somewhere and leave him to die, and then they go back to camp, which I don't understand the logistics of that, but we're just gonna let that go. And then Rick and Shane get into fisticuffs, and what happens?
Our little Carl,
that's right,
who's, like I said, was early, from one of the very early points of the comic, was a person who took care of business, and that'll be a theme that carries forward as well.
Yes, it is.
It was a little bit of, you know, shoot, ready, aim kind of thing. He pretty much,
Yeah.
you know, mess with my dad, blap, and shot Shane through the neck, I believe.
Yeah. And then we have Christmas. Merry Christmas, Shane. Um, and we have a really disturbing sort of flashback that Lori has at Shane's grave about the two of them together on the road on the way to Atlanta and how they, sort of hooked up. And then she spits on his grave.
Yep, indeed she does.
So it was not a pleasant reminiscence, apparently. And they all pack up and leave, and this is where we run into Tyrese, on the road. And his daughter Julie and her boyfriend, which again, there was another set of lengthy explanations there that I didn't need to have. Chris.
There needed to be some explanation because that guy is a jerk.
Chris?
Chris is just, I was like, kill him now. Just take him up now. Because he's a real, so I did not much care for Donna. But then Chris rolled in, and Chris had all the bad of Donna with no apparent. There seemed to be no upside to Chris for me at this point. I saw Chris having zero value.
Other than to make Tyrese angry. And I think one of the things here that we should mention too is that there is sort of a little bromance brewing between Rick and Tyrese. They bond almost instantly and have these lengthy talking sessions. And actually Tyrese tells Abraham's story from the show, where Tyrese took his daughter to a store, and this super nice guy that had been there forever, that he'd known and had a lengthy, sort of relationship with, actually cornered his daughter Julie and tried to rape her. And that was the story that, and he ended up beating him to death. And that was the story that they told for Abraham, just this season, actually.
Yeah, and I think when Abraham rolls up, there's he had. I mean, I think that there are parallels between there. I think Abraham actually has some backstory too that has something similar. It's not in a store, but it's more like the group of people he's with kind of ended up not being so nice to his family. But we'll find out in future episodes of our comic conversation if that indeed is it. Because I'm not really known for my attention to detail or short or long-term memory. So there may not even be an Abraham in the comic. So
there totally is. We know.
I'm pretty sure.
Okay, so anyway, I thought that was an interesting parallel that they tell a very similar story to Abraham's, and we didn't get all the details actually in the show for Abraham's story. That was told later by Kudlitz on Talking Dead, the guy who plays Abraham. He gave us a little more backstory, so it was very similar. So that could be part of why that's drawing more parallel. I have to say that Carol and Tyrese flirting is a little annoying.
It's
out there.
That's so in terms of divergence, kind of so you can get the it still seemed to be weird that there was a very kind of flirty thing starting up with both of those right now, but the Carol when you think about the television characters of Carol and Tyrese, I have a harder time seeing that kind of play out. But the Carol in the comic is a lot different than the Carol that she did.
She is. I enjoy her on the show much more. She and Daryl are my favorite characters on the show. Followed closely by Rick, but I'm not as big of a Carol fan actually in the comic. But yeah, they start doing this sort of like, they have to move the cars out of the way so that they can, so that they can continue to travel with the RV and stuff. And you know, Glenn makes a crack about, you know, how it was much harder before Tyrese showed up because he's a big guy. And you know, Carol's like, and not bad to look at either. And I was just like, oh, no.
Hey, there's no subtlety in the apocalypse.
I know. Just cheese, just straightforward cheese.
Yeah, that was romantic dialogue is written by a 12-year-old. You know, yeah, it was an interesting exchange. And then also during this time, you know, the source of Rick's T-shirt turban is the fact that it's getting cold, those brutal Atlanta winters, and
I didn't know they had winters that bad.
I didn't think they did either, but apparently it gets cold enough to start putting the zombies into kind of almost dormant state.
Right.
They start talking about that. Oh, it's cold enough now that they're just kind of on pause, which there wasn't as much. I mean, I think they talked a little bit about them slowing down when it was cold in the television show.
I want to say they talked about that a little bit at the prison.
Yeah, I think around that time frame.
Yeah.
But here in the comic, it was much more. There's a seasonality to the zombies in terms of activity and apparently number. That once it starts to warm up, they get a little more feisty.
And this is where we learn that Lori is pregnant. And I love when Rick turns to the group. He's like, "We're gonna have a baby." The whole group is just like, "Oh, that's great!
Awesome.
Congratulations! Thanks for killing us all." Now they don't actually say any of that. They all just sort of, you know, do that sort of blink, blink, what, you know, thing for a minute, and then there's a little bit of, oh, yay, but it's not really enthusiastic. And even Dale sort of comes at him and goes, you know,
maybe
possibility maybe is Shane's baby.
Yep.
That gets quelled pretty quick, but they find a neighborhood to go into that looks secure. They clear out a house, and they are grabbing all kinds of canned food, just listing off things from the cabinets. I'm like, I don't care.
And it was important that there were peaches, I think. No,
peaches pears. No, pears. Pears was the big deal.
Pears was where are the pears, and so we were giving the inventory. The alignment of pears inventory was being covered. So Wilshire Estates, right? Was that
what?
Wilshire Estates, I think, was the subdivision. Nice gated community.
Banner over the gate. Yes. Yeah, it was a gated community.
Which we find out for a reason.
Yeah. Which was initially, I think, to keep the rabble out, and now it's to keep the rabble in. Yeah. So Rick's and, you know, they have a good night where everybody pretty much hooks up, including Andrea and Dale. It's a frame I was glad was really dark.
Yes.
Lots of ink there. Thank you.
Because. And that's obviously, although I know much to your dismay in recent episodes of the television series, we've had footage of certain backsides of characters that you were lessons.
Dolphin Smooth. Yes.
Glowbutt.
Yes.
Abraham, but in the comic they. There's it's usually done tastefully with a lot of shading and those types of things. But Dale's the TV Dale, also a man I don't want to see getting busy. I got to be honest with you.
I want to say they're around the same age, but I want to say TV Dale is actually in better shape.
Yeah,
comic Dale is sort of pudgy looking, and
he's got a little dough going there. And a bit of a hairy man. He appears to be in the unpleasant hairy way.
Who likes to talk about his plumbing? Yeah.
So he's a catch.
Plumbing. Okay. So everybody hooks up and gets happy, and Rick, in the morning, Rick laments Carl's lost future. And we start to like Donna a little bit because she's a little less judgy-wudgy, because apparently she walked in on Andrea and Dale and smiled. Aw, isn't that cute? Sort of smiled.
My eye.
And then Rick gets everybody together to go and I love the fact that Donna and Alan go to actually hook up, and their kids interrupt.
Yes.
The Hellion twins interrupt by asking what sex is, but not sex, segs.
Yes.
What's sex? What's a sex? So Rick riles everybody to the call of battle. We're going to go clear out some houses and do this thing.
Move in, and everybody have their own place. It's going to be awesome, and there's pears and peaches to be had.
Awesome.
The land of pears and peaches.
You're part of the team. Everything is awesome.
Yeah.
Sorry. Anytime someone says everything is awesome, I get that Lego song stuck in my head.
Which would have been a great way for them to be singing that as they were going through. Although Donna wouldn't have sang it too long.
Yeah. A little like me right now. Okay, I'm done. So that's when Rick sees the sign that says, all dead do not enter. And goes running back, but it's not in time enough to save Donna. Meat. Meat dose.
Yes. Which, which Alan takes kind of hard. And
He sort of shuts down a little bit.
a little bit. And it's Alan's a tough character because you don't really get, of him kind of in there, but you don't really get much of a sense of. You get a much stronger sense of what kind of person Donna is than Alan is.
Yeah, he's very quiet through most of it. He really doesn't talk very much, and so it's a little hard to kind of feel sorry for him when he loses his wife, because he just sort of gets shitty, and you don't know if he was nice beforehand, or it's difficult to empathize or sympathize with him, because you're only really first hearing his voice the night before she dies.
Yeah. And it's being amorous towards Donna, which to me is, I don't know, I didn't.
Creepy?
I was like, really, dude? Wait, I mean, they are.
Do you wanna? I know. He's like, surprise! Ew, no.
Yeah, it was ick. There's a lot of ick in that whole. I'm glad they were interrupted, because I did not want to see. They couldn't have made that frame dark enough for me.
I'm glad everybody got their freak on before the next zombie attack. That's nice. So they all leave and have to go back on the road, and the guys are off hunting, and this is where we meet Otis, who shoots Carl.
Yes. A much more nimble Otis.
Yeah.
A thinner, trimmer Otis than we come across on television.
Right.
But not a particularly bright man.
No. So Rick almost kills him, and when Tyrese persuades him not to, because Carl is still alive, and it's sort of interesting because in the comic, a flesh wound is a big, giant, gaping chunk of stuff that gets taken out of you. That's what happens to Rick in the very first pages of the very first issue, and it's also what happens to Carl. This big, sort of enormous chunk of stuff gets removed. It's like Swiss cheese, like a big slice, or like a cartoon cat's ear, like that big chunk. But the damage is never enough to kill them, where it would normally be. If you were to take that much of a chunk out of a human being, it would be really difficult to recover from that. But it's just for dramatic purposes, I suppose. I don't know, because the chunk that gets taken out of Carl in the frame is actually quite large.
Yeah.
Like half the size of his head.
Yeah, but he's like one of those lizards you can pull the tail off and it grows back kind of thing. That stuff will all just. He's a Grimes, man. He'll regenerate. Actually, no. We'll find out later that doesn't happen for Grimes in this. More on that later.
Exactly. two of them end up being quite the pair. And this is so Otis says, I know someone that can take a look at your son. He's not a doctor, but I'm sure he can figure something out. And we end up meeting Herschel.
Yeah, but so help me. Do you remember
Yes.
in that one because it was like, did Otis explain that possibly the worst? Because I think he eventually, because in this, if Herschel's not a vet, I don't think he's maybe officially a veterinarian, but he's got a farm. But it was just the longest and most convoluted explanation on why. I know a guy who like is familiar with Band-Aids, and the way he described it was, I was like, hey, there's a guy who can fix them up. But it was just a very strange. But I think it's part of the general not so sharpness that is Otis in the comic.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, because it was lengthy. It was very, very wordy for someone that doesn't have a lot of smarts.
Yeah, it was just strange. It was like when skin's apart and you want it to come together. He's a guy that can do things to make it come together. And it's like, what? But most importantly, you need to get him there. And so they truck over to.
And they do. They get him there, and there's a lot of sort of hugging and emotional nonsense that goes on that I really just could. Because I think it's just because I dislike Laurie so greatly. Having already read through the comics, I think it was like year before last, or maybe a little bit before that even. Maybe it was like 2 years ago. I don't know. But anyway, having already run through the comics and having watched the show, my love of Laurie is so very small that anytime she starts to get upset about something, I'm just like, I start twitching. I'm just like, I can't.
She gets upset a lot. So.
Yeah, because it's all the time. She's always upset about something. She's always grumpy with Rick about something, and she's always upset or crying or enough. But this I thought was interesting because we do have something here and I remember there was like Otis and his wife, and then I remember Herschel,
girlfriend,
and Beth, and Maggie on the show.
Right.
I don't recall Arnold or Billy or Rachel or Susie. Yes, a lot of kids he's got there.
Yeah, well, I think one of them was in the barn. But
his wife was in the barn.
His wife was definitely in the barn. I
Yes.
think there may have been one of his kids too. And I thought there was another. I mean, and it's kind of weird. So Patricia and Otis.
There's no Beth.
What?
There's no Beth in the comic.
No Beth. Yeah.
No,
and there's Rachel and Susie, these twins that little twins.
Well, there's Lacey,
who's
Rachel,
annoying.
Susie, and Maggie, Billy, and Arnold. So he's got his stuff like a little arson of children.
Yeah, he's got a big family.
Yeah.
Plus, well, it'll come in the next episode, but in the comic, there's an extra green in the Sean, who's we don't meet yet. we'll meet Sean in the next 10 episodes.
Right.
Yeah, so big family.
Yes. So yeah, he's got a lot of kids and stuff, so we get introduced to them, and Otis, who shot Carl, his girlfriend Patricia. And Andrea tries to give Alan a lesson in parenting. I'm going to leave it at that. And they have a dinner together. Carl recovers. They have a dinner together, and Glenn talks a little desperate to Maggie afterwards.
Because he had his eye on Carol. This was something upon my first reading that I had not retained, but we had a very sad Glenn. And Glenn was sad because Tyrese had shown up and had taken Carol off the market.
Yeah, and she was older, but he liked her, was what he said, which I thought was funny.
And I think given his choices, of that group, he really had no choices. So, but Maggie's there to help.
Yeah, so she offers herself up there, which I thought was interesting.
Right away. It's like, hey, I'm not getting any younger, and it's an apocalypse, and you don't have an extra arm. You're good enough for me. Well, it wasn't like, gee, you strike me as a nice person. It's like, I'm not sure I'm going to get much better than you.
I know. Let's do it. That's sort of how that went, yeah.
Yeah, she's a much more assertive. Although I guess really in the television, so too.
It took her a little bit longer, I think, in the
Yeah,
show. But
yeah.
yeah,
But she
but
she
she was still
was you know,
assertive.
she was more um, for her and Glenn's first foray, she was a little more on the offense on that. So.
Yeah. And then Tyrese basically forbids Julie and Chris from getting it on.
Which is sound advice to me because Chris does not need to procreate.
I knew you were
Period.
going to say that. Chris gets upset.
In his hipster barista way. Like I hate that Chris character so much. There's nothing good about him.
No, there isn't. And that's pretty much the gist of it. That takes us through issues 1 through 10. So, what? Okay. It seemed like I think the only character that most people are very attached to, female character that everybody was really attached to, is Mackie. Andrea, everybody was like waiting for her to die on the show. Lori, people were counting the seconds until she was gone. um, is there anybody female character wise? I mean, that you like so far?
So I like in the comic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So outside of uh, a nude Dale is a creepy, scary thought. And anything that she contributes to me having to see a nude Dale concerns me, so I hold that against her. But in the comic, I like the Andrea character because she's doesn't really put on airs in terms of things. She ends up being useful pretty quick in terms of within these first 10, we learned she's a pretty good shot. And it came kind of naturally to her, and she realizes she's good, but she's not, all cocky about it. So she's useful, she's interesting, and she's just seems to be about, she tries to go out and consult, because she had gone through something similar, losing Amy.
Right.
And so she's trying to help Alan out, and Alan gives her crap, and so she basically says, well, F you, and kind of walks away. So stands up for herself, tries to make things better. So Andrea, for me, would be, from a female character, the one that coming through these first 10 I like, and I hope continues on.
I like her as well. And it's sort of funny because Carol is, I think, less likable in the comic and more likable in the show.
Yeah.
And I it is the exact opposite for Andrea, because in the show, couldn't stand that woman. But in the comic, I like her. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to figure out, because it's what's happened between the TV show and the comic is that there are certain characters that, so Andrea through through a lot of the comic, I mean, she's there are certain characters that are very strong.
Yes.
And Tyrese is another one that in the comic you can tell already in these first 10, and then business picks up as we keep going here.
Mm-hmm.
He's a kind of a force, and there is a lot of romance between him and Rick in terms of just there's some stuff going on there, and he's got things to handle. Where the TV version, it's been a little weirder arc for him. I think it's an outstanding actor that's playing him.
Yes.
But it's just
his character is a lot less consistent on the show.
Yeah, because you really don't know exactly where he's coming from. You knew he really liked Karen a lot. I mean, this is the one thing that we do know, is he was a big Karen fan.
I think that the fact that he's got a daughter sort of changes his priorities. So in the comic, I think it's a little stronger there, but also in the show, the way that they frame things with him is he goes through ebbs and flows that you would kind of think that like everybody would go through. Like, okay, I've had enough of this crap. No, I want to live. Like, oh, I can't do this anymore. It's just so tiring. I want to live. I think he really he has these peaks and valleys that are so much more pronounced than everybody else. Rick tends to go through them as well, but for Rick, it's he's still somewhat consistent because even though he wants to be a farmer, he still recognizes the fact they have to kill people at the fence, whereas Tyrese is just sort of like hands off. He goes completely like a little more polarized, I think, in his sort of ebbs and flows, and it makes for difficult television watching, appreciation of characterness. Just really, you struggle to like him at times because he's so polar, I think.
Yep, I'm with you there. So, out of the first 10 for you, who's your kind of favorite character after issue 10?
I gotta go with Rick.
Hmm?
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say though, I thoroughly enjoyed Shane. He was so much fun because he went crazy. He just went bat poop crazy so fast. It was just a joy to watch. Comic.
Yeah, yeah, and Carl was having none of that.
I know.
No.
Yeah, I think the development of Carl is sort of interesting to watch because he gets twisted up in some interesting ways. In the show and in the comic, I think, sort of coming down the line. So it's gonna be interesting to discuss that.
Yes. Because one of the things they didn't show, but obviously what happened is that Jim used to take Carl out behind in the woods of the fence and then taught him mime, and you're going to see Carl doing some mime activities in the future. He's like, look, it's a zombie on a rope, and he's like chasing after zombies, pretending they're on a leash and that kind of stuff. So expect some mime from Carl in future episodes. So.
Okay. Anyway, couldn't help myself. And I have to say, like, as jokey as people actually like miming is, really annoying. When I was in Paris, there's lots. I don't understand. I mean, I think there's like a school there or something. There has to be. There's lots of them, and they are just that annoying too, and they will follow you. It's really serious.
If you don't turn around, you don't know because they're quiet. So.
Creep behind you in their box. Anyway, okay. On that note,
finish strong. Finish strong with a little bit of mime population in France talk, because that's what someone tuning in to hear about the Walking Dead comic.
You started with the mime stuff. It was mechanic. All right. He was a mechanic. Worked on things.
M word.
Just miming mechanic. All right, I gotta go. All right.